Welcome to your 1.3 distance and midpoint video. In this lesson, you are going to be able to find the distance between 2 points as well as the midpoint of a segment. So first, let's just start off and talk about distance. Distance is always positive, whether you're walking forward or backwards, you're walking steps. So we talk about that as the absolute value. From this point to this point, we subtract, and it's the absolute value because it's always a positive number. So if we're going to go from Q to R, yes, you could just count 1, 2, 3, or you could take -6 minus -3 and then do the absolute value of that. So some people get a little bit confused when you do that subtraction and the absolute value when, especially on this, you can just see the distance is 3 units away. But if we're looking at subtracting and then doing the absolute value, that is another way. So from A to X, we would subtract, and that would be -5 minus 3 and the absolute value. Or again, counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, it's 8 for the distance. Now, when it gets to not being on a number line, it gets a little bit trickier when we're in a coordinate plane or 2 points that are not on a horizontal axis or vertical where you can just count. So what we need to do is kind of what we did up here and do the subtracting or follow this distance formula. So if we're looking at our distance formula, we're basically finding the distance between, and we'll see if it'll let me highlight here. Nope, it's not going to like me. So I'm going to do color coding here of this number and this number. The x's we're going to subtract, and then the y's, because we want to figure out what that distance is horizontally and vertically to figure out what our change is here. Okay, so if you want to follow this formula to a T, you can label. X comes first and then Y in the alphabet, and this is your first pair. X comes first and then Y in the alphabet, and this is your second pair. So now we can go ahead and plug it in if you're a plug in the formula kind of person, where we can take and subtract. Now, if you go from your x2 minus your x1, you need to make sure you put the minus sign and the negative. And then your y2 is -1 minus -6, because there is a minus a part of the equation. So then those are double negatives and they change to positives. Don't forget your squared. Sometimes I just write out the whole form and then I plug the numbers in, and so I don't forget those negatives or those subtraction signs. So when we add, we get 9, and then here we get 5, and we square them before we add. So this is 81 plus 25, and that's going to go underneath a radical. And you can do that in your calculator, or you can leave it like that, but it's nice to kind of see that that's approximately 10.3. So we kind of know versus just the radical 106. We don't really know how long that is. So I want you to try this one. So I would write out your radical symbol, then I'd put your parentheses squared plus and your parentheses squared plus and your subtraction symbols in there. So as long as you get your x's together and your y's together, you're good to go. Make sure that if you go from this first x to the second x, then you do that same thing for this one. You go from your first y to your second y. But I would, if you get a little bit confused with this, I would suggest you label and then you plug everything in and kind of go from there. All right, so go ahead and plug that in and simplify, and then we'll check here in just a second. So pause the video and try it, and then push play and check when you're ready. Push pause, try it. All right, so let's check and see how you did. You should have gotten 3 minus a -4, which turns into a double negative or positive, so 7 squared. And then over here is -1 and -1, which makes -2. Now, when you square a negative, it's a positive, because -2 times -2, negative times a negative is a positive. So if you accidentally type that into your calculator without parentheses, it's going to lie to you. So watch your signs. Everything here should be positive after you square something. And then take 49 plus 4 to get your square root of 53, which is 7.3. All right, so now if we were to look at this in a coordinate plane, Let's just go ahead and do our points from A up here. We're going to do these points. I'm going to plot them. And so that would be -4, so -1, 2, 3, 4, and then -6, so down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That would be this point right there for C. And then I'm going to plot D at 5, -1. So go over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, +5, and down 1. And that is our D. So we're looking for this distance right here. And so what is Pythagorean theorem? Well, it is a squared plus b squared is equal to c squared. And that is using a right triangle. We can find our hypotenuse C by using the legs A and B and squaring them and adding them together. So let's go ahead and do, actually I'm going to get rid of that first. So let's figure out what A is. We can count because it's a horizontal axis here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So that is, and I'm going to write my formula again. 9 for an A. My pen is kind of being weird. And then B is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I want to figure out what my C squared is. So 9 squared is 81. 5 squared is 25, and then when I add those together, I get 106. Hey, that looks pretty familiar, doesn't it? Because that is what we got when we used our distance formula. So Pythagorean theorem, finding the hypotenuse, or the length, is basically inverse of our distance formula. So we're finding distance, Pythagorean theorem, we're finding distance from 2 points. So you could do it graphically if that makes a little more sense to you and you want to do it that way, go for it. All right, midpoint. Midpoint is the point halfway between the end points of the segment. So we want to basically add up our x's and divide by 2, add up our y's and divide by 2, and we'll find that middle point. So we're going to skip that example there, and we're going to jump down because you're going to see more of these types of examples here with 2 points. Make sure that you don't get confused because we just saw distance and we had 2 points. This is midpoint, so make sure you read those directions and you know what you're searching for. So from midpoint, we are going to take our x1 plus our x2 and divide it by 2. Then we're going to take our y's and add them and divide by 2. So our x's, remember that we have an x and a y. X comes first and then y. So we have our 8 plus our -14, and we're going to divide by 2, and then our -6 plus 12, and then we're going to divide by 2. So if we add these together, come on. We get -6, and we're going to divide that by 2, which is 3. So I'm just going to go ahead and write -3. But if you need to see that step, you can write that. And then we're going to add these together. That's 6. 6 divided by 2 is 3. So there is my midpoint. All right, so now let's go ahead and have you try. So you're going to add your x's, divide by 2, and then add your y's and divide by 2. So go ahead and try that now. Pause and try it, and then push play to double check. All right, and you should have gotten -5, -3. Now, what happens when they give you one of the end points and they give you the midpoint, but they want to figure out what the other endpoint is. So this is kind of the end, this is the middle, and this is the other end. So how would we figure out what this is when we can't really use our formula? Well, we could use our formula and work backwards, but it's quite a bit of algebra, and it kind of gets to be a lot of steps. So here's the easy way, is to figure out how are you going from here to here? What's that change? Because it's going to be the same change from here to here, right? If this is in the middle, then we are going to just repeat that same change. So from -8 to 5, I would be adding 3. So I'm going to repeat that same change, as I'm going to call it. So -5 plus 3 is going to tell me that this is -2 for my x coordinate of the other endpoint there. Now I'm going to do that same thing for my y's, but I'm going from 6 to 10. How do I go from a 6 to a 10? Well, I add 4. So I'm going to repeat that same change of adding 4, but I'm going from 10 and applying the change of adding 4 to get here, which would be 14. 10 and then add 4 is going to give me 14. So go ahead and try that for B, and you can do it graphically if you would like, or you can do it algebraically, kind of like we just did. And it's the same way for graphically. You just follow the change, kind of the slope. How much did you go up and over? Do that same thing to figure out your A. So try it, or you can kind of follow along if you're just not quite sure. I'm going to do it both ways, both kind of our little algebraic way, and then I'm going to do it graphically as well. So I'm going to go ahead and graph it -1, 3, and label your points. 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 for C. So I am going to find A. Well, A has to be kind of over here somewhere because it's A, then B, then C. B is in the middle, and because that's what it says, missing endpoint if B is the midpoint. So I know this is the middle, as it's telling me. So I'm going down 1, 2, 3, and I'm going left 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I am going to repeat those same steps and go down 1, 2, 3, and left 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And there is my A point, and that is at -7, 0. So let's look at it graphically. I'm going to, again, kind of go this direction. So from this x to this x, 5 to -1, I'm subtracting 6. So I'm going to subtract 6, and that is going to give me -7. Now I'm going to look at my y values, and I'm going from 6 to 3, and that would be subtracting 3. So I'm going to subtract 3 from this one, and that's going to give me 0. So we can get it graphically, we can get it kind of algebraically in finding our changes. Make sure you know which one's the middle, make sure you know which one's the end, and then maybe kind of put in your parentheses of what you're looking for. That might help as well. All right, so now we're going to talk about segment bisectors. So a segment bisector is any segment, line, or plane that intersects a segment at its midpoint. So basically it karate chops it in half so that it is shareable. Let's think of your best friend. You're going to give them half because you want to be super nice to them. So we use tick marks a lot of times, or if they give you the word bisect, then, or midpoint, you know this is going to be equal to this. So if they label one part, you know this part. And then you can do your segment addition that you learned in the previous lesson and take this plus this and set it equal to the total and then solve. So let's go ahead and see what that looks like set up. 6 minus 3x plus 6 minus 3x is equal to 14x plus 2. Some of you are also thinking, well, if this is half, then couldn't I just cut the total in half and set those that half equal to half of the total? Yeah, you could do it that way if that makes sense to you. Multiple ways to solve. So 6 and 6 makes 12. These are on the same side of my equal sign. Negative 3 and negative 3 is negative 6x. And then we're going to bring down the 14x plus 2. I'm going to add 6x to my 14x. 12 is equal to 20x plus 2. Subtract 2. 10 is equal to 20x, and then divide by 20 to get my x alone. So x is equal to 1/2. And it is asking us to find the measure of PQ. So we're almost there. We have what x is. So PQ is this distance here, 6 minus 3x. Well, we know x is 1/2. So I'm going to plug 1/2 back in, and 6 minus 1.5 is going to equal 4.5 for PQ. So make sure to read those directions so we know what we're actually looking for. All right, let's take a look at this last one here. It is being bisected. We have a midpoint, so this being in the middle, this is congruent to this. So again, you can either write 2a minus 1, or you can take half of this and set it equal. But a lot of people like to write it in, fill in all the pieces, and then take this left and this right and add them together to the total and set it up that way. So I want you to try this one, and then we will check as you finish and see if you've got it right. So 2a minus 1 plus 2a minus 1 is going to equal our 3a plus 1. So add my 2a and my 2a to get 4a. Negative 1 and negative 1 is negative 2, and that's going to equal 3a plus 1. I'm going to subtract my 3a because it's smaller. That way I don't deal with negatives. So a minus 2 equals 1, and then I'm going to add 2. So a is 3. Now it's asking me to find the measure of AC. AC is the total, so I'm going to plug it back in. Let's use a different color here. 3a plus 1. Well, a is 3, so I'm going to put the 3 and replace the a with the 3, and then I'm going to multiply here and then add my 1. So 10 is what AC is equal to. So go ahead and go through these thinking questions and kind of determine, can you identify the relationship between distance formula and Pythagorean theorem? What is the correlation between mean and the midpoint? And then how is the midpoint formula different than the slope formula? So just some things to kind of think about and process as we finish up this lesson over distance and midpoints.